Yeah. Thanks, Jacob. You hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you on behalf of Canada's chemistry and plastics manufacturers. And I'll start by situating the chemistry in the industry value chain, chemistry and plastics sector in the Canadian energy value chain. But before I do, maybe just put down a marker, or maybe it's a trigger warning. But yeah, there's going to be challenges. Policy will matter, but there is no question the global chemistry and plastics industries are about to and have already started a transformation to a net zero and circular economy. And they weigh the opportunities far higher than they do the risks. And, this is a personal comment. Please don't attribute it to me. But I would look at the announcements that major chemical makers made in 2021, and I look at some of the proposed investments in the Houston area and in Alberta and in Quebec, and I have to ask myself, will a major chemical producer ever propose another chemical plant that's not net zero from day one? It's a question on my mind. So it's real. It's a huge opportunity, and the industry is really poised to take advantage of it if we can get the policy conditions right, of course. We are the third largest sector, manufacturing sector in Canada. That's an $80 billion a year sector. And for our American friends, just for context, 80% of all the chemical shipments in Canada are exported, and 80% of those go south of the border. So 2/3 of what we produce, commodity chemicals, shipped to the US. We get about an equal trade back in further refined and more specialized chemicals. Now, we do have crude-based chemistry, we have bio-based chemistry, we have electro-based chemistry, but primarily when, the material 80/20 rule, we're talking about natural gas liquids chemistry. And what our sector does is take the natural gas liquids, and we take enormous amounts of natural gas energy, and that gets converted into commodity chemical products, whether methanol or ethylene and its derivatives, or beginning in 2022, propylene and its derivatives. When we look at the energy sector, we consume, actually, and people don't understand this very well, we consume over a quarter of all the natural gas flows in the province of Alberta every day, and we consume about 15% of the natural gas flows in Ontario. And the important thing about that, the most important thing, is you take a relatively low priced commodity like natural gas, relatively, and we will add 20 times the value by the time you get to a polyethylene or polypropylene pellet. So an enormous multiplier, value chain multiplier through chemistry. We'll just take a minute here and we'll position the industry globally, and then we'll talk about what's happening in 2021 and the outlook for 2022. I think first, it's really important to remember this is a colossal, it's a mega industry, right? It's about a $5-6 trillion a year industry, and it's continually expanding. Every year since World War II, the chemistry industry globally has grown about 1.5 times global GDP, and that continued through the pandemic, and that shows no signs of stopping. And so you see two key drivers, of course, rising populations in Asia. They want the middle class lifestyle. If it's a finished product, if you can see it, taste it, touch it, smell it, it's probably got the business of chemistry in it. 95% of all finished goods have the business of chemistry. As long as people want more stuff, they're going to need a lot more chemistry. The second, though, is we do have a widespread pursuit of a more sustainable future: clean air, clean water, clean energy, safe, nutritious, abundant food. And all of those things also involve enormous and increasing amounts of chemistry. Just to give you one example, an average 3-blade wind turbine will contain 7 tons of plastic resins. So again, the industry sees, yeah, there are challenges on the road to a low carbon future, but there are enormous opportunities to be realized as well. That strong sustained demand for chemicals is being felt here in Canada as well. And you even saw that, the essential role of chemistry in terms of public hygiene, both for sanitation of materials, keeping materials wrapped and well packaged, but also key chemistries for disinfectants and others. And so by the end of 2021, we are seeing our shipments have already returned to 2019 levels. And in fact, I would expect by the time we get formal statistics at the end of Q1, we'll see that by the end of 2021, we probably exceeded 2018 shipment levels, and that was a record year for the Canadian chemistry industry. So survived, very resilient, did very well through COVID, and poised for continued growth. globally, that growing sector, it expends nearly half a trillion dollars every year, 500 billion in new capital expenditures on plant and equipment. And when we look at the United States, they've benefited from that tremendously. They get about 10% of that flow. And over the last 8 years, they've seen nearly 400 global scale chemistry projects worth nearly 400 billion Canadian dollars that have either been built, are under construction, or being proposed. And in fact, that represents half of all the manufacturing investment into the United States going in the chemistry sector. And so while we've done well with the plants we've had, good production, the outlook's been a little less positive when it comes to the investment picture. We should have seen, and some of you have heard me say this many times, but based on our historical presence and our historical trends, we should have seen 10% of whatever went from the States. I should be sitting here telling you now we have 35 to 40 new global scale chemistry plants built or underway, and that represents 35 to 40 billion of new economic investment. Unfortunately, what I can tell you is that in the last 2 decades, we have 2 major new investments. The good news is, and that's in 2 decades, the good news is both of those facilities are scheduled to come online this year in 2022, and they represent in total about $7 billion of new investment. So real missed opportunities, at least up until 2021, major missed opportunities. And so something to celebrate, but I would characterize the past decade, 2 decades, as a missed opportunity for the sector and the Canadian economy. We've got the people. We've clearly got the energy resource. It's a low carbon energy resource. We've got the feedstocks, quality, price, quantity. What's missing really is the investment conditions that the industry finds much more attractive elsewhere. But as we look to 2022 and then beyond, there's some important signals of optimism. And I mentioned that right at the start, and at least that's true in Alberta and Quebec. And before I explain that, I'll just stress again in addition to this rapid growth the sector is undergoing, we have two, not just one, 2 major transformations underway. One, transformation to net zero chemical production, and 2, the transformation for a circular economy for plastics. And you take just one of those, and you're talking about trillions of dollars of new investment on top of meeting anticipated growth. We've got 2 of them happening at the same time. Each is going to be ambitious on their own. Together, it's almost staggering to contemplate the change that you're going to see in the chemistry and plastics sector in the coming decade and decades. The good news for Canada, though, is that we do stand well positioned for both of those transformations. And if questions come up, I can talk about circular economy in the Q&A, but let's just focus on the net zero transformation and understand where Canada's positioned on that. You know, when you're siting a chemical facility, traditionally there's two key factors. Are you going to put it close to the feedstock? And here we think about Alberta or the US Gulf Coast. Or are you going to situate your plant close to market? And there we think of Ontario, New Jersey, and other major chemical producing regions in the East Coast. And with what I mentioned, that many of the global chemistry producers are making commitments towards a low economy future, if not a net zero future, you're starting to see a third factor come into place. Am I going to be able to locate my facility? And remember, we're spending $500 billion on new facilities every year. Am I going to be able to locate my facility in a place that's going to allow me to meet my low carbon ambitions? When we look at Canada, Alberta's particularly advantaged. The province has introduced a petrochemical incentive program that levels the landscape, investment landscape with the US Gulf Coast. And I think I mentioned we've got low carbon energy, we've got low carbon feedstock, the price is right. And most importantly, what does Alberta have? It has the geologic, the policy, and the built infrastructure to support carbon capture and storage. And so in 2021, despite the pessimism up to the end of 2020, you start to see something different happen. And in 2021, we saw through the Alberta Petrochemical Incentive Program, seven new major chemistry investments proposed for the province of Alberta. And here's the thing. Every single one of those is envisioned as net carbon zero from day one of operation. And that includes Dow's major proposed investment at their Fort Saskatchewan site, which would be the world's first net zero ethylene and derivatives facility. And not only are they proposing to build a new facility net zero, but as phase two of that work to retrofit, if you will, the existing facility and make that net zero. It'll be one of the largest facilities in the world and will be net zero. We look quickly to the other side of the country. I live in Quebec, in Gatineau, and it's surprising how much is going on, and it's quite quiet. They've got a very different approach to investment attraction, but one of the things they did is when the federal government put in its accelerated capital cost allowance in fall 2018, Quebec actually added a 30% markup, 1.3 times the federal piece, and they're being very strategic in supporting other investments. So they've got low-priced, low-carbon electricity, and we saw 3 major announcements in Quebec, again, all proposed as net carbon zero, and we expect to see some pretty major announcements in Quebec around battery and e-vehicle chemistries as well in the coming weeks and months. So lots of positive things happening on the horizon, and we look for continued expansion that's going to deliver economic benefits and environmental benefits for decades to come. I would say, have to be honest though, if there's a dark cloud on the horizon, it is the industry in Ontario. What were once the largest, newest, lowest emitting facilities globally in their corporate fleets are now the oldest, amongst the least efficient, the most costly to operate, and the highest emitting. And that jurisdiction, with the exception of the Nova investment of $2 billion, really hasn't seen any new greenfield investment for more than 3 decades, maybe 4 now. And so you can see the rust out taking place at the same time. You've got this massive $400+ billion of new investment going on in the rest of North America. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out, if we can't attract capital into the Ontario chemistry sector in the next decade at most, it's not going to be here. And that's a $22 billion a year industry. So we're working very aggressively for the Ontario government to share its importance that it has for the auto sector with the chemistry sector, so that we can sustain the economic opportunities and allow the sector in Ontario to renew and transform the way it is elsewhere in North America. We did a study last year, just to finish on that item. We had IHS Markit come in and they looked specifically at the Ontario chemistry cluster, and they compared it to 5 other competing chemistry clusters in North America. And they found the Ontario cluster ranked poorest in terms of investment competitiveness. And in fact, when they look at 14 specific parameters they use in their model, Ontario measured last or second last in 12 of those 14 parameters. So I often hear government people say to me, well, what's the one thing we can do? What's the one thing I can do to make things better? Listen, when you've got to the point that you're 12 out of 14 parameters, you're worst or second worst, there's no one thing. We've got major work in Ontario to do. And hey, we all know we're not the only sector that has that challenge in that province. But we have to move, and we have to move quickly, or things will rust out very quickly. We saw that in the Montreal area in the early 90s. Once one facility went down, it took 3-4 others with it. And a jurisdiction like Montreal, you can lose 20,000 high-paying jobs, and the city moves along no problem. We lose these jobs in Sarnia, and the economy will not be the same when you replace those with the call center jobs. So as we look to our priorities for 2022, the most important thing is to take these nearly 10 major proposed investments coast to coast that were announced last year, and work aggressively to move those over the finish line into FID. And Ottawa in particular has a lot of work to do there in terms of doing its part to restore the investment competitiveness environment. Alberta deserves kudos. Certainly Quebec does as well. British Columbia is not doing too bad. Ottawa, not paying any attention at all, and they've got some major work to do. So we'll be focused on that, and also focused as we head into the election and after, to try to get Ontario to work with us to develop an intentional strategy to renew and transform the chemistry sector in that province. Jacob, that's about it. Time's short, so thank you for the opportunity, and hope some of that's of interest to folks here today.
Thank you, Bob. Greatly appreciated. I often think of the chemistry industry as being somewhat energy adjacent, but it's good to remember a major consumer of energy, but also a major user of the feedstock. And I think you could probably argue that we wouldn't have the chemistry industry we do today if we didn't have the energy resources that we have. And obviously that connection is very strong.
Absolutely, and it's an educational piece too, right? You ask most Canadians and even federal policymakers, why do we have an important, world scale chemistry sector in Alberta? And the first thing they'll say is oil, and I'll say that's a great answer, and it's completely the wrong answer. It's the natural gas liquids, my friend. So
That's right, and it's
anyway,
not
we've
just
got a lot
natural
of work to
gas;
do
it's
to help
natural.
people understand the sector.
It's true. I mean, natural gas, and then you ask people what natural gas liquids are, and that people aren't necessarily sure what that is. So these are important things to raise, especially with our audience, which is terrific.
Yes.
Um, any
That
folks?
dialogue and education is important, right? Because you've got natural gas, you've got natural gas liquids, you've got liquefied natural gas. And those of us that are in the space and engineers and scientists, yeah, we can figure all that out. But you say that to folks in Ottawa and the eyes glaze over pretty quick. So as an industry, we've got to find better ways to communicate with our key stakeholders on their level, unfortunately.
Their key distinctions, like you say. Questions from folks on the panel.
Jake, I got a quick one again. It's Tim.
Go for it.
Go easy on me.
Oh, Bob, I will. My question is, as you noted, you're huge consumers of natural gas. So we care a heck of a lot about the chemistry industry. You're some of our biggest customers, and so the chemistry industry isn't doing well. That hurts us, and I'd argue it hurts the electricity industry because a robust chemistry industry is a big consumer of electricity and
Absolutely.
and of those high paying job holders and their homes and the lives they lead. It's all contributing to the economy as a whole. What can the rest of us around the table do to help you? Because to the point of Jake's point about let's think about how we're collaborative here. I want a robust chemical industry in this country for lots of reasons. How do we reinforce your messages?
Well, I think Ontario is critical, and I did 10 minutes is a short amount of time, and chemistry doesn't stop when we produce chemicals. What are they for? And they go into the mining sector. They help, in here you'll see this in Quebec with the announcements they're making. If you need critical minerals for the automotive transformation, you're going to need a heck of a lot of chemistries for that. So they've got a value chain approach to getting the critical minerals into the sector so that they can participate in that enormous transformation that's taking place. But it's true with mining, it's true with pulp and paper, it's true with every other industrial sector. And so one of the things we've tried to say to the Ontario government is you've got all these plans to renew the automotive sector, but guess where a lot of your inputs come from? They come from us. And if we're not here, making the paints and coatings, these are really expensive to ship. They're liquids. And you're not going to bring them from Tennessee and elsewhere and keep your Ontario automotive sector as attractive and profitable as possible. So I think that's a key part of it is for probably a lot of us to get together. And it's not just chemistry, but to really start to push the Ontario government harder on renewal. Great news this week. Minister Fedeli announced a $40 million advanced manufacturing plan. Super fantastic. Last week, Michigan announced a $1 billion advanced manufacturing plan. And so that's what's our future here? And it's not our choice. That's up to elected officials and the people that elect them. But it is our job to tell the government the status quo is not a reasonable, at all by any stretch, a reasonable proposition for Ontario. Either we start to catch up with others because we're not going to get ahead of them. We either start to catch up or we get out of the business altogether. And again, that's up to the elected officials and the people that elect them. But I think more of the sustained type of dialogue you've been having with federal officials on behalf of key energy intensive manufacturers in Ontario is probably a good thing.